Hello everyone, welcome to Flooded Temples episode number 5. Today we're heading to the Ellora caves to explore the ancient secrets behind the creation of the Nectar of the Gods, known as Amrita, and also the poison Hala Hala. Now I know how exciting that sounds, but before we get straight into it, we need to explore the most essential part of the process, and that's the water. I think the first thing we should determine is if these caves and temples at Ellora were actually flooded on purpose from the time they were built. The first thing I did to see how the caves could have been flooded is to go onto Google Earth and look at the watersheds around them to see if they led into them. If you look here, you can see the Velganga River that runs down the mountains from the north and past the cave complex next to Cave 28. And over here you can see another major drainage that ends in a beautiful waterfall between caves 5 and 6. If you look over here, you'll see it looks like the Millennium Falcon is being dug out of the ground. Oh no, wait, that's just the tourist center for the site. Let's not get distracted and keep looking for the water. One thing you'll notice as you look at the cliffs and hillsides behind the caves is there seems to be a lot of surface drains and walls built to redirect the water. And when you look closely, you'll see that the idea was to reroute the water away from the caves and not into them. One thing that's important when investigating ancient sites is to remember that they've been attracting attention from the locals and invaders for thousands of years. Much of what you see there today could have been moved, defaced, or even newly repaired. So it's essential to gather as much history as possible of what's happened at the site over the years so you can figure out what it looked like when it was actually built. When I looked online for some basic information about the caves, I found that they were thought to be built between the 6th and 10th centuries CE. There are 34 caves total. 12 are attributed to the Buddhists, 4 to the Jain, and the rest to the Hindu community. In the 16th century, an Islamic ruler named Aurangzeb gained power in this part of India and paid an army of 1,000 men to try and dismantle cave number 16, that's also known as Kailasa Temple. But after limited progress because of the hardness of the rock and the fact that the temple was not made out of blocks, but instead carved out of the mountain, the army was eventually called off. In recent times, much of the work done at the caves can be found on India's Archaeological Survey website, which summarizes the construction and renovations that have taken place from 1953 to 2011. One of the first things they started working on when they got going in 1953 was to improve the steps leading up to the temples and to also improve the walking path in front of them. But one thing I find interesting is they also started doing repairs from the very start on the floors, which are described as undulating and disintegrating, and to the bottom of the pillars that needed to be scraped and then repaired because they were spongy. Another strange anomaly with the floors in many of the caves is the round bowl-like shapes that can be pretty deep, which needed to be filled with concrete so people didn't trip over them, and the many small connected holes everywhere, which many theories suggest are the perfect place to tie ropes to. After a couple years of improving access to the site, work shifted to repairing the cracks in the ceiling and walls that were allowing water in. Work remained ongoing throughout the 34 caves at Ellora from 1953 until 1959, when it looks like a bigger effort was put into what most would consider the main problem plaguing the caves, which was the constant ingress of water into the site from the caves above, which was mostly a problem during the monsoon season. A lot of work was done building walls and surface drains above the caves to redirect the water around them. At this point, I want to mention something that seems really strange to me. Nobody disagrees that the builders of the Ellora caves must have intentionally brought surface water down from the cliffs above to fill cisterns for bathing water and drinking. However, it seems like the annual monsoon season would have overran those caves with too much water. Many people will argue that the large size of their water system is due to Ellora being a very busy place for travelers and merchants in the past. And while I can see the rationale of the historians who put this theory forward, I don't understand why the constant flow of water from the spring-fed river which runs past Cave 28 that feeds many of the other cisterns in the same area wouldn't have been enough water for the many travelers. It is also noteworthy that apparently no consideration was given to how the ancients would keep the rainwater off their floors during the wettest time of the year. It's easy to see the water leading straight down to them, even if eventually it led into one of the cisterns. A famous historian, doctor, and writer from India named Yamini Mubai wrote an essay titled Ellora, Water and Sacred Spaces. The essay focuses on the waterscape in these settlements and its role in consolidating the region as a center of religion and trade over millennia. In the essay, Yamini talks about how the area is a micro-watershed of the upper Gadabari River Basin, and that the Yelganga River that flows past Cave 28 is believed to be the embodiment of a water goddess, Ayla, from whom the region Ellora gets its name. Yamini describes that some cisterns are partially underground and protected by overhanging rock, creating a substantial tank for the collecting and storing of water. The primary source of the water for the cisterns would have been rainwater and runoff circulating through the vesicular rock. The quantity of water collected appears to indicate continuous usage, indicating perhaps that their cisterns were normal and innocuous aspect of the cave's structures, but nevertheless an essential one. Sounds like flooded temples to me, folks. Let's go look at one of the caves that looked the most interesting to me and see if we can figure out what the water levels would have been. And also see if we can figure out how they would have made that Amrita magically appear on those lingam in the back in the sanctuaries. This is cave number 15 at Ellora, one of the Hindu caves. On the second floor, it features a Shiva lingam located at the very back of the cave, within the sanctuary, at the end of the giant hall of columns. The cave is also known as Dashavatara. Leading up into it is a large stairway and then a monumental gateway leading into a large open-air courtyard. In the middle of the courtyard is a freestanding monolithic mandapa with a 2-story rock-cut cave behind it. If you look at the floor in the open-air courtyard, you'll see many of the round holes I mentioned earlier. If you look at the walls at the bottom corners on either side of the courtyard, you can see the double holes that they think were for tying off ropes. Also look how the second floor looks completely different from this point down, indicating what I think must have been the intentional water level on the floor for the temple. Continuing to the back of the cave towards the sanctuary, we find a giant lingam with a lily flower carved in the ceiling above it, and its yoni draining into the hole in a wall. Very cool. Now let's go back outside to the courtyard and try and piece together what the whole process would have looked like, starting with where the ancient Hindus would have attracted their lightning bolts. In Egypt, you recall it was the obelisk that served as our active lightning rods, attracting the lightning. But of course here, there's no room for those. I think it is also pretty evident that whatever was ever standing up here probably fit into one of these holes. Upon examining the mythologies and stories of Lord Shiva for elements resembling active lightning rods, something begins to stand out, and I think that thing is this little guy right here. Lord Shiva's trident. If you recall from previous episodes, you'll know that an active lightning rod requires the ability to put a positive charge on its tip to attract the lightning. In today's technology, piezoelectric rods use the incoming wind from the storms to vibrate the quartz-like piezoelectric material inside. My guess is this drum-like object known as damaru was used for the same purpose. In Hindu mythology, it's believed that the beating of the damaru by Shiva created the world's very first sound, nada, and that this first sound was made in the void of nothingness. Sounds like lightning to me, folks. Imagine taking a copper trident or two, setting them up in the courtyard and using ropes to secure them. What could you do with the lightning once it struck? Well, what if you took some more copper ropes, attached them to the tridents, then fed the ropes through the holes in the columns on the second floor? We could attach them to the copper poles standing on the ground, and we could essentially bring the lightning into the second floor and start zapping the water in there. I wonder what that would do. Well, as it turns out, the water would start to get really hot. But not only that, a chemical reaction will take place, creating what's called plasma-activated water, known as PA for short. At the back of the cave, in the sanctuary where it's cooler and the lingam is, some of that plasma-activated water in the air is going to start to cool and condense on the flower on the ceiling, and begin to drip down onto the lingam, then flow into the mysterious location hidden in the cave. One counterintuitive thing about collecting a condensed liquid like I'm talking about here is that usually it'll remove any contaminants and leave you beautiful clean water. However, with plasma-activated water, the opposite occurs. Once it's condensed out of the air, it still remains full of those nitrate species that the ancients were looking for. We'll come back to plasma-activated water and explain what it is and how it works a little bit later. First, I want to take a look at the process I've just described and compare it to an ancient Hindu legend called the Samudra Manthan, translated as the churning of the sea or milk, which talks about the nectar of the gods, Amrita, and also the poison Hala Hala. In the legend of the Samudra Mathan, Shiva's trident, the Trishul, represents the forces of creation, preservation, and destruction. However, it was not used as a tool in the Samudra Manthan itself. Instead, it was Mount Mandara that was said to be used as a turning rod. These two things obviously don't line up, but let's carry on. Again, in the legend, a rope is used to depict the actual turning of the rod mountain. It appears to be a cooperative tug-of-war of sorts, intended to have occurred between two distinct groups of beings, the gods or devas and the demons or asuras. The rope is actually a serpent named Vasuki. It's said the reason Vasuki was used was his divine strength and maybe his resistance to the deadly poison Hala Hala, which when it escaped from his mouth, Shiva breathed to save creation, but the darn stuff turned his throat blue. This is where I think you can see the process of making plasma-activated water and the mythology start to line up. During the chemical reaction that occurs when lightning strikes water, it splits H2O into reactive oxygen and nitrogen species, such as peroxides and nitrates, which supercharge the water with antimicrobial and nutrient-boosting properties. Additionally, ozone is produced, a deadly gas, heavier than air, that can burn your lungs and throat. Perhaps this is what is known as the Hala Hala. If we revisit the process of creating plasma-activated water from the lingam in the sanctuary and consider why the ancients would condense it from the air, it becomes apparent that there may be a couple of reasons. When the water vapor from plasma-activated water condenses, it becomes liquid water and is free of impurities. Still, it will also contain any reactive chemical species that were present in the vapor phase, like nitrogen oxides. Plasma-activated water is being produced and used for many different applications today. Universities are testing it on plants, which is showing that the plasma-activated water benefits plant growth by generating reactive nitrogen species, which stimulate germination and boost plants' natural defense mechanisms against pests and stress, leading to reduced reliance on chemical fertilizers and pesticides. But the application I think that's probably the most important to the people of Ellora Caves is its use as a potential medicine. In 1998, Robert F. Fergod, Louis J. Ignarro, and Farid Murad jointly won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for their discoveries concerning nitric oxide as a signaling molecule in the cardiovascular system. Their groundbreaking work revealed how this previously underestimated gas acts as a key regulator of blood vessel relaxation and expansion. And while plasma-activated water doesn't contain nitric oxide, it does contain nitric and nitrous acid, which break down into nitrate and nitrate ions that the body can convert into nitric oxide through a multiple-step process. So, were the ancient builders of the Ellora Caves possibly creating plasma-activated water and then using it to fertilize and nourish their crops? But not only that, were they also collecting the best of it by using the lingam and then using it for their own consumption? Maybe to improve their blood pressure and their own fertility? I wonder if some of the ancient artifacts found worldwide, which may be alluding to full bellies and full blood vessels, are all pointing to the same thing: the fertility provided by plasma-activated water. Anyways, guys, that's my take on it. And as always, if you have any comments, leave them with those of the robots below. If you think the possibility of a free medicine being made available to all, which may have also inspired some of the world's most advanced architecture, is a pretty cool idea, then I encourage you to share this video and ask your followers what they think. That's it for this episode of Flooded Temples, guys. In the next episode, we're going to go to Japan and explore some of the Shinto temples to see if we can figure out what they're up to there. Thanks a lot for watching, folks. All the best.